There were 15 bulldozers lined up outside the entrance to my farm, looking more like an invasion force than construction equipment. And right in the middle of it all stood Becky, arms crossed, wearing aviators, and barking into a walkie-talkie like she was coordinating an air raid. My chickens were flapping around like crazy, the goats had taken off from the fence line, and I couldn't even get my tractor out because a big sign now blocked the path. Property seized by HOA District Authority. I blinked a couple times, rubbed my eyes. It was 7 a.m., Tuesday morning. This had to be some kind of sick joke. Still half asleep, I stepped out onto the porch in my flannel and boots, coffee in hand, and headed toward the ridiculous line of bulldozers, honestly expecting some prank show camera crew to jump out and yell, "Surprise!" Instead, Becky met me halfway, grinning like she'd just won the lottery, waving a thick folder in my face. "You're in violation of HOA Territorial Expansion Policy 39B, she said, flipping it open to a map that looked like it came off an old website from the early 2000s. I chuckled, thinking maybe she was messing with me, but the rumble of the bulldozers behind her said otherwise. They were revving like they were about to storm a beach. So I asked her straight up, who gave her the right to step foot on my land? She poked me in the chest and said, "Just because you think this is your land doesn't mean you're above the rules. It's HOA property now." I looked at her, then glanced at the bulldozers, took one slow sip of coffee, turned around, and walked right back to the house. She started yelling behind me. "That's right. Keep walking. You're done here. You'll be off this land in 2 days." I didn't say a thing. Didn't need to. Because while Becky thought she'd pulled off some kind of power move, she had no idea who she was dealing with. In about 30 minutes, she was going to find out the hard way that I'm not just some farmer with a flannel shirt and a pickup truck. I'm the guy who approved the zoning maps she never even bothered to check. The same guy who signed the permits she just tried to throw out. Because I don't just live in this county, I run it. And she was about to regret every single bulldozer she brought onto my property. Back inside, I set my coffee down, walked over to my office cabinet, and pulled out an old binder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the original land deeds, the zoning protection clauses, and a copy of the Agricultural Reserve Act, the one I personally helped get passed when I was county commissioner. Then I picked up my phone and called the sheriff directly. Told him I had a hostile trespassing situation going on, with heavy machinery and an HOA president pretending to have government authority. He said he'd be over with backup within the hour. I stepped back out onto the porch, arms crossed, just watching Becky parade around like she'd already won. She'd even strung yellow tape across my gate and had some guy with a megaphone practicing safety messages. She held up a laminated sheet that said HOA expansion approved and started shouting about turning the place into a mixed-use community zone, with a dog park, fitness trail, and vegetable garden. Said she'd already sold rental slots to 3 yoga instructors. I asked her, one last time, to get those bulldozers off my property. She laughed. "Unless you want to get flattened," she said, "you'd better start packing up your crops." Just then my neighbor Dan, retired Navy guy who owns the land next door, wandered over, watching the circus unfold. He leaned toward me and whispered, "She doesn't know, does she?" I shook my head. Dan gave a low whistle. "Man," he said, "this is going to be better than bingo night at the VFW." And right then, we heard a heavy rumble overhead. The helicopter hovered above, circling slowly. For a split second, I saw the smug look on Becky's face falter, just a flicker, before she snapped back and shouted, "Good! They're here to enforce the reclamation." I almost laughed out loud. A few minutes later, 3 county patrol SUVs rolled up with their lights flashing. Deputies stepped out fast, and the lead officer made a beeline straight for Becky, holding a folder in his hand. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we've received a complaint of illegal land occupation." Becky raised her eyebrows and held up her laminated permit like it was a golden ticket. "I'm the president of the HOA," she snapped. "I'm acting under newly approved policies and expanded territory maps. These bulldozers are completely legal." The deputy took the paper from her, gave it a quick glance, maybe 3 seconds, and then let out a tired sigh. "Ma'am, this looks like it was printed off a neighborhood forum. This isn't a valid legal document." Right then, one of the bulldozer operators climbed down from his cab and asked, "So, are we still getting paid or what?" Becky spun around and snapped at him, "Get back in formation." Then she turned to me with fire in her eyes. "You called the sheriff? You're really escalating this." I raised an eyebrow and said, "You escalated it when you rolled 15 bulldozers onto county-protected farmland." She screamed back, "That's not your decision to make. You're not even relevant here." The deputy looked at her, slowly, and replied, "Ma'am, he's the county commissioner. He's your boss's boss's boss." A heavy silence fell across the whole field. Dan, my retired Navy vet neighbor, let out a big laugh that quickly turned into a wheezy coughing fit. Becky's jaw hit the dirt, and in some last-ditch effort to claw back control, she spun around to face me and said, "This isn't over. You might have fooled a few people with fake titles and doctored paperwork, but I know the law." I stepped in closer. "Becky," I said, "you don't even know where the county line is. You crossed it, with bulldozers, and handed out a stack of fake orders. And now you've got the entire county government staring straight at you." Her face turned bright red. She pointed her fingers at me like she was casting a curse. "You'll regret this. I swear. We're taking this all the way to the top. You'll see." I turned to the sheriff and said, "Might be a good idea to hold on to those bulldozers for now. We may end up seizing them for being unregistered heavy equipment." Becky let out another shriek. One of the deputies, keeping his voice polite, asked if she'd like to sit in the back of their SUV to cool off. As they guided her to the vehicle for questioning, Dan shook his head and muttered, "She brought bulldozers to a policy fight." I clapped him on the shoulder and said, "And declared war on the guy who writes the policies." Even after they took her away, the tension in the air hung heavy. Her bulldozers just stood there, awkward and still, like a group of confused sentinels. Their operators leaned against them, not sure if they were still on the clock or part of a crime scene. The deputies kept working, snapping photos, marking tire tracks in the dirt, talking to my neighbors, who'd gathered like it was some wild county fair. Then I saw Rachel walking down the gravel path from the house. She was calm, but alert, eyes sharp as ever. She had on jeans and a flannel shirt, hair pulled back, clipboard under her arm. She wasn't just my wife, she was also a county judge. And she wasn't here just for the drama. When she reached my side, she handed me the clipboard and leaned in close. "Injunctions signed," she said. "Wanna hand it to her sister yourself? Or should I?" I looked up, and there she was. Becky's sister, Lisa, strutting onto my land like she was making a grand entrance at an awards show. She stepped out of her silver SUV in heels, a tight pencil skirt, and a blazer that screamed, "Corporate meeting," way too formal for a dusty dirt road. Her whole vibe gave off, assistant principal on a power trip. Without missing a beat, she marched up to one of the bulldozer guys and snapped, "Resume operations. We have full authority." I cut her off before the poor guy could even get his boots back on the ladder. "And who might you be?" I asked, already knowing exactly who she was. She turned to face me, eyes narrowed. "I'm Lisa Remington, acting president of the HOA in my sister's temporary absence. This land is designated for redevelopment under Expansion Initiative 4C. So either step aside, or I'll have you cited for obstruction." The sheer nerve almost made me laugh out loud. Almost. Rachel stepped forward, holding out the clipboard. "Lisa," she said calmly, "you're about to violate a standing judicial order." Lisa hesitated. Her eyes darted between us. "And you are?" she asked, practically sneering. Rachel smiled. "County judge. I'm the one who just signed the injunction that halts any activity or equipment use on this land. I'd recommend you read every word, unless you'd like to end up in the same squad car as your sister." Lisa yanked the clipboard out of Rachel's hand and skimmed the document with the kind of fake confidence people use when they don't actually understand legal wording. Then she slapped it back into Rachel's hand. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We'll fight it." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Please do. But take it to court, not my husband's farm. Now kindly remove yourself and the illegal equipment before this turns into a coordinated trespassing charge." Lisa tried to fire back, But the momentum had already left her. The bulldozer operators had started stepping away from their machines. None of them looked eager to get arrested over an HOA stunt. A couple had already pulled out their phones and were calling their companies. One of them mumbled something about never taking another job again without seeing a real permit first. Dan wandered over again, cracking sunflower seeds and watching Lisa like he was front row at a legal drama. "You folks really know how to liven up a Tuesday," he said, half laughing, half chewing. Lisa didn't respond. She turned on her heel, stormed back to her SUV, and started furiously jabbing at her phone screen. A moment later, she peeled off down the road in a cloud of dust. Rachel sighed and looked at me. "You think they're really dumb enough to come back?" I glanced at the idle equipment still lined up like some failed parade and nodded. With that much entitlement? Wouldn't surprise me. We headed back inside, and I sat down at my desk to call the zoning board. Didn't take long to get their attention, especially after I told them that Becky had forged a new boundary map, claiming the HOA now covered more than 200 acres of land they had no legal claim to. Thing is, I still had the official zoning maps from when the land was surveyed 2 years ago. The zoning director, guy named Mark, promised to pull the public records and have someone out here to investigate first thing in the morning. I also reached out to the agricultural office to report the attempted disturbance of protected farmland. This wasn't just a petty dispute anymore. Becky and her board had crossed some serious lines, falsifying legal documents, violating zoning laws, and bringing in heavy machinery to a protected reserve. And I was going to make sure the penalties hit hard. Later that afternoon, I got an unexpected email from a local reporter. Turns out, Becky had already reached out to the press. She was pitching a wild story about some rogue farmer blocking community development with threats of violence and anti-progress rhetoric. I invited the reporter out to the farm. When she got there, I handed her copies of my land deeds, the official zoning maps, and a video clip from one of my trail cams, clear as day, showing Becky out there in a hard hat, pulling up boundary markers and hammering in new ones like she was running her own construction crew. As she watched the footage, her eyes got wide. She asked if she could use the material for her article. I told her yes, on one condition: she had to tell the whole story, not just Becky's HOA fairy tale. She agreed. By the time evening rolled in, things on the farm had finally settled. The diesel stench faded, replaced by the familiar smell of hay and dirt. The animals were calm again. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Folks like Becky? They don't back down easy. I sat on the porch with Rachel and Dan, sipping lemonade as the sun dipped behind the pasture. Dan was telling one of his old Navy stories, this one about a captain who once tried to take over a port using nothing but bluff and bravado. "Reminds me of your HOA gal," he said, cracking a grin. "All bark and no paperwork." I nodded. She thought she had a right just 'cause she said she did. Never checked the records. Never filed the proper forms. Just charged ahead. Bulldozers and all. The next morning, right on schedule, the zoning investigator showed up. His name was Harold, older guy, slow-moving, but sharp as a tack. I walked him along the property lines, showed him the original survey and the fake one Becky had drawn up, and pointed out where the bulldozers had been parked. He nodded a lot, scribbled notes, muttered legal terms under his breath. When he was done, he looked at me and said, "This is going to be fun." He promised a full report to the county development office, plus potential charges for filing false documentation. Then he asked if I wanted to submit a formal complaint against the HOA. I said not yet. Let's wait and see what their next move is. Because something told me Becky wasn't finished making a fool of herself. And when she came back, I wanted every camera rolling. Didn't take long. 3 days later, after all the drama, detainment, and headlines, Becky showed up again. And this time, she didn't try to play it subtle. She pulled up in a black SUV with tinted windows. A guy in a suit got out first, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Then Becky stepped out like she was the villain in a B-grade movie. Heels clicking on gravel, folder clutched in her hand like it held sacred texts. Her lawyer followed behind, leather briefcase in hand, eyes scanning the place like he was tiptoeing through a minefield. Becky was smiling again, tight, fake, and walked right up to the newly posted county signs marking my land as off-limits. She held her folder high like she was delivering commandments and said, "I demand full reinstatement of our development rights and the immediate removal of this illegal signage placed by your office." She pointed straight at me, like I was the ringleader of some underground rebellion, instead of the county commissioner. I didn't flinch. I just stepped forward, calm and steady, holding a folder of my own. The deputy assigned to our area stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching quietly, ready to step in if she got out of line again. That lawyer of hers popped open his briefcase and started rambling about misuse of power, obstruction of public development, and even threw in a line about constitutional violations. I let him go on, and when he finally paused for breath, I opened my folder and handed him a fresh stack of documents. At first, he flipped through them quickly, like he was just humoring me. Then he slowed down. And then, he stopped completely. His fingers froze mid-flip, like he just realized he was holding a live wire. Becky caught it. What's wrong?" she hissed. The lawyer leaned in and whispered something to her, low. She waved him off. "Say it louder. Say it in front of him. I want him to hear it." He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and said quietly, This could be a serious issue." Becky's eyes narrowed. "What kind of issue?" I spoke up before he could answer. "The kind that proves everything you've done was illegal from the start." I handed her another document, still images pulled straight from my trail cam. They showed her ripping out the original boundary markers and replacing them with her own. I'd included time-stamped records too, directly from the zoning office. She scoffed, waved the papers away like they were nothing more than junk mail. But her lawyer didn't scoff. He slowly closed his briefcase and turned to her, face tight. "Becky," he said, "I strongly recommend we try to resolve this before things get worse." That set her off. "You're supposed to be defending me, not folding like a lawn chair." Then she spun back toward me, jabbing a finger through the air. "You won't win. I've got the board behind me. I've got the community. And when they find out you're blocking recreational land access and shutting down growth, they'll turn against you." I didn't say a word, just stepped aside and motioned toward the front gate, where 3 news vans had just pulled in and crews were unloading cameras. That same reporter I'd spoken with earlier was already setting up. Becky froze. Her lawyer went pale. The reporter raised her mic, and the cameras started rolling. "You wanted public attention?" I said, looking Becky dead in the eye. "You've got it. Let's show them everything. Your fake maps, your bogus permits, the bulldozers you parked on protected farmland. Oh, and let's not forget that attempt to override county zoning laws with a laminated brochure." Becky looked around, her eyes bouncing between the cameras, her confidence draining fast. Her lawyer whispered one last plea, probably begging her to walk away. But she didn't. Instead, she charged toward the cameras and launched into a dramatic speech about land hoarding, out-of-touch officials, and how the system was rigged against community progress. But with each claim she made, I calmly responded, with facts, documents, dates, and video proof. When she claimed I'd only lived in the county for 5 years, I pulled out my birth certificate, issued at the hospital just 20 miles away. Honestly, the reporter didn't have to dig for anything. Becky was doing most of the work for her. Then came the moment I'd been saving. She started talking about infrastructure and community access. So I reached into my folder one more time and pulled out a file labeled Land Infrastructure Easement Agreement. I flipped it open and showed everyone, on camera, that I wasn't just the legal owner of the farm. My family's land holdings extended under more than 60% of the HOA's infrastructure. The roads, the power lines, the irrigation systems, all of it was sitting on land we owned. "See," I said calmly, "these easements were granted back in the 1970s. But they're up for renewal this year. And after everything that's happened, I've decided not to renew them." Becky's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to lie down in the gravel and disappear. The reporter stepped forward. "Just to confirm, without renewal, what exactly do they lose?" I answered plain and steady. "Water access, electrical access, road access to 2/3 of their entry and exit points." They built their community on our infrastructure, and now I'm cutting the cord." Becky lunged forward, shouting about blackmail and abuse of power. But before she got close, the deputy held out a hand, told her to calm down. But Becky's voice cracked as she started shouting about conspiracies, calling me a corrupt land baron like we were in some kind of old western. Then she swiped at the reporter's camera, and that was it. The deputy stepped in immediately and cuffed her for interfering with a member of the press. Her lawyer didn't even try to stop it. Instead, he walked up to me quietly, handed me his business card, and muttered, "If she fires me, let me know. I'd rather work with you than against you." A few minutes later, the sheriff's SUV rolled away, Becky in the back seat again, though this time she looked more dazed than defiant. The reporter turned to me and asked if I had any final words. I glanced over at the line of bulldozers still sitting awkwardly on my land and said, "Some folks think loud engines and louder voices equal power. But real power? It's in quiet paperwork, steady hands, and knowing where the real lines are drawn." As the camera shut off, I heard the news crew chuckling and whispering to each other. Clearly, this wasn't what they'd expected to film today. I wasn't surprised. Becky tried to bulldoze her way through law, logic, and land, and she brought the wrong fight to the wrong guy. And truth be told, I was just getting started. After her second meltdown, things got real quiet. But not the peaceful kind. The kind of quiet that says something's shifting. People started whispering in private, then questioning in public, and finally, demanding answers. That press footage spread fast. Local news, social media, even the high school media club shared it. Especially the part where Becky slapped the camera and ranted about land hoarders. That went viral overnight. Became a meme, even. But the real punch? It wasn't the meltdown. It was when the reporter asked me what land I owned, and I calmly listed every single piece of infrastructure their HOA relied on that they didn't legally own. That's what hit. Because it made people realize the roads they drove on, the clubhouse where they held birthday parties, the lines that powered their porch lights, all of it sat on my family's land. And I'd made it very clear that goodwill had expired. The first real backlash came during a hastily thrown-together emergency HOA board meeting. Becky, of course, didn't show up. Lisa tried to take over again, but this time the crowd wasn't having it. Homeowners stood up, demanding to know how their dues had been spent, why the HOA had rented bulldozers, hired an out-of-state lawyer, and filed fake paperwork that landed them in a full-blown criminal investigation. One man asked where the money for the equipment came from. Lisa fumbled and finally said it came from something called a discretionary beautification fund. The room exploded. Beautification fund? One woman shouted. You call bulldozing a protected farm beautification? Another person stood and yelled, I want an audit. That one word, audit, set off a chain reaction like a spark dropped in dry grass. That's when things really started to unravel. I heard all of it from a neighbor of mine who lived right on the edge of the farm and the HOA boundary. He'd stop by every few days, drink a cup of coffee, and give me the latest update like a personal town crier. He told me the residents were now petitioning to kick out the entire board and bring in temporary overseers, until the county could help them untangle their current mess. Apparently, I'd become something of a local legend overnight. They started calling me the zoning sheriff and the land whisperer. I never cared much for titles, but I'll admit, it was nice seeing folks finally realize that land ownership isn't just about lines on a map. It's about responsibility. And Becky had trampled all over that. But she still wasn't done. Somehow, after the lawsuits, the media circus, the public meltdowns, she pushed ahead with one more desperate move. This time, she filed a lawsuit against the county itself. According to her complaint, the county had violated her HOA's right to develop, unfairly targeting her because of personal grudges. She even listed herself as the lead plaintiff and me as the primary offender. She claimed I'd abused my position to wage some personal vendetta, that I was using public office for revenge. Of course, she had a new lawyer by then. The first one bailed after her last disaster. This one was younger, flashier, clearly thought he could stroll into a small-town courtroom, throw around some big-city charm, and win with confidence alone. The case landed in the local court, which meant it passed across my wife Rachel's desk first. Naturally, she recused herself right away, didn't want even a hint of conflict of interest. But the judge they reassigned it to? He wasn't exactly Becky's ally either. He'd lived in the county his whole life, ruled on dozens of zoning disputes, and had no patience for people who thought loud voices and laminated folders counted as legal precedent. When the court date came, Becky showed up wearing a blazer a size too big and brought exactly one person with her, her new lawyer, who started sweating within the first 10 minutes. I sat across from them, calm and collected, backed by the county's full legal team. Honestly, I didn't need to say much. The paperwork handled it. Her lawsuit was full of errors, wrong citations, false claims, no real evidence to back any of it up. At one point, she tried to argue that her HOA had operated with expanded powers since 2020. The zoning board shut that down immediately, presenting clear maps that showed no such approval had ever been granted. She tried saying I had some personal vendetta. The county produced documentation proving I'd never even spoken to her until the morning she rolled in with 15 bulldozers. By the second hour, her lawyer was slouched in his chair, barely making eye contact. By the end of the day, the judge dismissed the whole case, with prejudice. And he made it clear the county was free to pursue counterclaims if it wanted. Becky looked like the floor had dropped out from under her. And it didn't stop there. With support from the zoning board, the county filed official charges: fraud, trespassing, environmental damage, and unlawful land use. The bulldozers? Impounded. Now part of an open case. Meanwhile, I submitted paperwork to formally dissolve the HOA's unrenewed infrastructure easement. That meant, unless they came back with a proper legal agreement, their water and road rights were gone. At first, they puffed their chests. Then, they begged. I gave them two choices. 1. Pay the new easement fees and issue a public apology. Or 2. Dissolve the HOA entirely and transition into a voluntary neighborhood association, with no authority and very limited land claims. They picked option 2. Becky didn't show up for the final vote. Her name was wiped from all HOA records, and a new board was brought in to start undoing the damage she'd done. To top it all off, I got formal approval to hold a public auction for any equipment abandoned on my land for more than 2 weeks, including the bulldozers. We turned the auction into a county fundraiser, and to everyone's surprise, it drew a crowd. Hundreds showed up. What started as a legal victory became a full-blown community celebration. Families came out with their kids, local food trucks parked along the edge of the field, and a couple of small-town bands played throughout the day. One of the bulldozers, the very same machines that were supposed to tear up my land, ended up being bought by a nearby children's museum. They planned to turn it into a play structure for an exhibit called Know Your Land. It was poetic. The machines meant to flatten my farm were now going to help kids learn about the value of protecting land. I didn't give a speech. Didn't feel the need to gloat. I just stood quietly off to the side, taking it all in. The laughter, the conversations, the relief in people's voices. Something good had grown out of something ridiculous and exhausting. The bulldozers were gone. The lawsuits had been tossed out. And whatever power Becky once thought she had, gone too. As I looked across the crowd, I realized something deeper. This fight wasn't just about fences and zoning laws. It was about reminding people that just because someone acts like they're in charge doesn't mean they are. Real authority? It comes with responsibility. And it sure as hell doesn't ride in on a bulldozer. The dust, both literal and metaphorical, had finally settled. The HOA was in shambles. Its former leaders either removed or too embarrassed to show their faces. And slowly, the neighborhood started to come back together, this time with a little more humility and a lot fewer laminated brochures. But even after everything, Becky wasn't gone. Sure, she disappeared from public view. But not from people's minds. Whispers floated around. Some said she was still scheming, that she had one final card to play. Most folks ignored the rumors, wrote it off as drama-fatigued neighbors trying to stir up the next scandal. But I knew better. People like Becky don't fade quietly. They wait, they plot, and they strike when they think nobody's looking. So I wasn't surprised when, 3 weeks later, she showed up again. This time, she crashed a live-streamed county meeting. We were in the middle of discussing plans for a new public park on the east side of the county, well outside of any HOA jurisdiction, when she stormed into the room with her own camera crew in tow. She looked thinner. Her blazer was wrinkled, her makeup heavy, but that wild fire in her eyes hadn't gone out. She walked straight down the aisle, ignoring the stunned faces around her, and stepped right in front of the podium, cutting off one of the commissioners mid-sentence. Her voice came sharp and loud, slicing through the chamber like a knife. "I will not be silenced," she shouted. "This is a government run by bullies and cowards, and the people deserve to hear the truth." Security started moving toward her, but the mayor, who was chairing the meeting, lifted a hand and said, "Let her speak." We all knew what this was. Her last stand. A final, desperate attempt to stay relevant. And honestly, maybe it was time to let her unravel in public one last time. Becky grabbed the mic and went off, ranting about land monopolies, corruption, and conspiracies. Claimed the county was hiding land records to suppress private development. Accused me of rigging elections, forging zoning maps, and funneling taxpayer money into secret projects on my farm. Her voice cracked from the strain, but she didn't stop. She didn't even seem to notice the looks of confusion and disbelief spreading across the room. It was surreal. Even a few of her former supporters, who had probably shown up just to see what kind of show she'd put on, looked at her like they didn't recognize the person standing there. When she tried to connect our new public park project to her failed HOA expansion, claiming it was some kind of revenge plan to sabotage her dream of a suburban utopia, that's when the mayor finally had enough. He asked her plainly, "Do you have any evidence?" When the mayor asked her to hand over the tablet, she refused and turned on him instead, accusing him of being part of the cover-up. That's when security stepped in. They escorted her out, but not before every news outlet and social media page had caught the entire spectacle on camera. Within hours, the footage had gone viral. Becky had gone from a controversial name to a full-blown public disaster. That night, my phone lit up with dozens of calls, reporters, concerned citizens, even distant relatives who'd seen the video and wanted to know what was really going on. I gave the same calm answer to each one: her claims are false, and her actions are under ongoing legal review. That was it. No emotion. No personal digs. Because by that point, Becky wasn't a threat anymore. She was a warning. A lesson in what happens when entitlement grabs the wheel, and common sense gets shoved in the trunk. A few days later, the sheriff's office made it official. Becky was being charged with disrupting a government meeting, tampering with public records, and misusing private security, charges that traced all the way back to the Bulldozer debacle. Her trial was set for the fall. And by the looks of things, she wasn't going to have many allies left in her corner. With Becky out of the picture, I shifted my focus back to what really mattered: rebuilding the community. We launched a new public program called Know Your Land. It was a free series of workshops designed to teach folks about zoning, easements, and property rights. And let me tell you, the response was overwhelming. People signed up from every part of the county. What started as a legal education program quickly became something more. It became a way for people to reconnect, to rebuild trust, not just in the system, but in each other. We held the first session right at the edge of my property, near the spot where those bulldozers had once sat. That place now held a small public garden, planted and maintained by volunteers. Benches, flower beds, even a sandbox for the kids. Where there'd once been tension and confrontation, there was now laughter and learning. Kids ran around while older folks shared coffee and practiced reading boundary maps together. The highlight of the series came when I brought in guest speakers, attorneys, planners, even a few former HOA board members who had learned the hard way and wanted to speak out against unchecked power. People asked real questions, shared real laughs, and for the first time in a long while, nobody was afraid of fences or fake violations. Rachel even taught a few sessions herself, walking folks through basic legal protections for property owners. And Dan, my retired Navy neighbor, gave an impromptu talk on how to spot shady leadership. He got a standing ovation, mostly for the jokes and not-so-subtle jabs at laminated permits. Then one afternoon, while I was organizing materials for the next session, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper, Handwritten. It was from Becky. Her handwriting was shaky. The tone? Not what I expected. She didn't quite apologize, but she admitted things had spiraled. That pride had clouded her judgment. That she never really understood the laws she tried so hard to enforce. She said she wouldn't be returning to the county. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, just for understanding. I read that letter twice. Then a third time. Eventually, I walked out to the barn and pinned it beside a framed photo I had hanging there, one of the 15 bulldozers lined up outside my gate. Beneath it, I placed a wooden sign carved by a local craftsman. Never start a war with the man who draws the map. People laughed when they saw it, but not just because it was clever. It was a reminder that power without knowledge is dangerous, that titles mean nothing without truth, and that the loudest person in the room is often just the most afraid of being wrong. The county weathered the storm. And the land? It was quiet again. Not empty, just at peace. That evening, I took one last walk around the property, the sun dipping low behind the trees. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Not pride. Not relief. Just a deep, steady sense of gratitude that the truth had held. And that sometimes, the land really does defend itself, so long as the right hands are holding the line.